Close your eyes for a moment, not to leave, but to make the world softer. Breathe in the night, the dry cotton scent of a town that has forgotten rain. The faint tang of salt if you live near the sea. The distant hum of traffic that never quite reaches here. Tonight the sky is a bowl of navy velvet, pinpricked with patient stars. In the middle of that velvet, a comet is coming. They call it Hager's Comet on the news, because names make things smaller and easier to sell. In Norristown it had an older, quieter name, the Traveler's Tale. It had been 49 years since anyone in Kestrel Bay remembered a comet that bright, old people rubbed their eyes and told stories about how their grandparents wrapped blankets around the children and pointed, as if the comet were a lighthouse for storytellers. For Nora it was more personal. Her father had been a watchman of small things, a man who kept radio towers tuned, and old telescopes steady. He liked to tell her that comets were the sky's way of sending postcards. He left her one of those postcards, an old logbook full of half-finished diagrams and coffee stains. And then he stopped coming home the winter after a comet had passed. Some nights she read his handwriting until the lamp died. On nights like this, the town changed. The grocery store put out extra milk. The cafe on Market Row burned a slow, thick coffee that smelled like brown sugar and warm hands. Children with pajamas still on clustered on porches in their parents' arms. People who knew each other only in passing stood shoulder to shoulder and looked up as if the sky might rearrange itself and answer. Nur lived on the edge of town, in a house that remembered better weather. It faced the lighthouse, which itself was a quiet, stubborn thing. White paint cracked like an old smile. Nur worked nights at the observatory to towns over, calibrating cameras and coaxing faint galaxies into clear images. She had a way with small instruments and a stubborn patience inherited from her father. Tonight, though, she had called in sick. She wanted to watch the comet with her own eyes. She sat on the back steps, a wool shawl around her shoulders, a thermos of tea in her hands. The world around her softened. Even the cricket that usually dared to sing nearby fell mute, as if the town had agreed to hush so the comet could speak. The comet arrived like a memory, first a suggestion, then a thread of light, then a tail unspooling like silk. People clapped. Horns blew in the town square. On phones across Kestrel Bay, slow-motion footage bloomed like fireflies. Something about this comet was quieter than the spectacle warranted. The tail wasn't just white. It had veins of green and lavender that shimmered when you looked away and were suddenly gone. When you looked back, Nora watched the light pull across the sky and felt the hair on her arms lift, as if some current ran between her and the distant spark. The first oddity was sound. At first it was just a vacuum of usual night noise, the air conditioners that usually argue with each other, the late dog that always barked at the moon. All of it hushed. Then, beneath the hush, came a low, traveling tone, like a tuning fork being dragged across the ribs of the world. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound that sits behind your teeth and makes you remember things you haven't thought of in years. NOO or checked your phone. No alerts, no warnings. The town's emergency siren remained obediently silent. She could see other lights far off where neighbors had left lamps on, and television glare smudged the darkness. But near the lighthouse, by the long stretch of cliffs and scrub brush, a thin pillar of light had detached from the comet and swung like a curious finger toward the earth. It moved in a deliberate, careful arc, not a rain of meteors, but a single needle of luminance that threaded between stars. Her breath caught. The logbook on her lap, dusty, edges soft from use, had an entry in her father's handwriting, dated the night he last wrote. Comets have friends, it read in a looping, half-joking script. Watch for the needle. Nor laughed at the coincidence and then felt foolish because the laugh seemed too small for the moment. 100 yards down the cliff path, the lighthouse keeper, old Mr. Hale, who swore by the integrity of his oil stove and had once fixed Nor's bicycle, shuffled onto his porch. He cupped his hands around his mouth, a gesture that meant, "Are you seeing this?" Nor nodded, though he couldn't see. The needle touched the earth in a place where the land fell away into scrub and shale. It didn't explode. It did something more impossible. The light coalesced, like steam condensing into a bead, and then parted to reveal a shape within, not quite metal, not quite stone. It hovered, a small, bright thing that hummed an unplaceable frequency. For a moment it looked like an ember shaped into a child's toy. For another, it looked older than the town and the sea and all the people watching. Nor felt the air move along her skin as if the thing exhaled. The thermos slipped from her fingers and clattered down the step. It was only then she realized the street lamps had dimmed, as if the night itself had borrowed power from them. Someone in the distance screamed. It was a small, sharp sound that made her blood write its own story over the skin. People began to move, drawn by the light toward the cliff. Phones lifted. Feet tread brittly over gravel. Someone shouted measurements and the word impact, which didn't fit. Nur turned to go, drawn as much by curiosity as by something residue deep in the marrow that had once known how to follow strange lights. Her feet left the porch rungs carefully. She did not want to tumble because falling seemed an emotive reaction in front of whatever the heavens had decided to show them. The path to the lighthouse was a narrow bone of earth. No one who had grown up on those cliffs wanted to race over it at night. The fog could come down in fingers and hide a hole and take you with it. But tonight the crowd was a river and she floated with it, a piece of driftwood obeying the pull. Mr. Hale walked beside her, his step slower than his breath. When they reached the cliff's edge, the shape had changed. The small bead of light now had facets, not like glass, but like the cut of wind. It hovered half a meter above the ground, stirring the grasses at its base into a halo of silver. It was the size of a sleeping dog, and it seemed very tired. Nor noticed then that the stars above them had rearranged. Or perhaps her eyes refused an ordinary map. Constellations wore slight smiles that had not been there earlier. The comet's tail arced not across the sky but down the valley, as if reconsidering where its path would end. The pillar of light thickened. A second bead winked on the far side of the cliff, and then another. And in the drip of time between heartbeats the small lights began to move, not falling, but stepping, like insects crossing a page. The humming deepened so that Nor felt it in her molars. It felt like the memory of a language you almost speak. She reached for her father's logbook and held it against her chest as if it might steady whatever was happening. In the margins, a note in a different hand, her own, from when she had been 8, and scribbled notes pretending to be grown. Read, "If the sky drops things, don't pick them up alone." A woman behind her whispered, "They're toys," and nobody laughed. A boy began to cry for reasons that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the rightness of being small before something very ancient. The biggest of the lights, the one nearest them, tilted. A seam opened along its surface like a slow smile. For a second Nor wondered if it might be a trick of reflection. Then a sound like a bell struck from the inside, clear as a coin dropped into a well, rang out, and the light turned to look at her, and in that look there was intelligence. Not cruelty and not curiosity either, but an unreadable calculus that made Nor's heart loosen in a way she could not name. She took one step closer. The light answered. The ground beneath the lighthouse trembled like a throat. Clearing.NOO or single quotes. S phone died in her pocket with a soft, white blink. The radio in Mr. Hale's truck briefly came to life. Not with static, but with a voice that spoke only in numbers. The comet, split again. And down the valley something small and bright detached and began a slow, mirroring fall toward the town center. Nor reached for the logbook with both hands and felt the world tilt, as if gears had shifted behind the sky. For a breath she tasted copper and old paper and something sweet. "Don't move," Mr. Hale hissed. And that's when she heard it, a voice that was not in a voice box but in the bone behind her eyes, saying a single word she could not translate into her own language, and yet understood perfectly. It said her father's name. Nor's shoes scraped the gravel as she leaned forward, and the crowd inhaled with her. The light pulsed. The silence after the word was more terrifying than the word itself. It was as if the night had been hollowed out, leaving only Nor and the sound of her father's name echoing inside her bones. The crowd at the cliff stood frozen, their breaths caught midair. waiting for something they didn't understand but somehow recognized. The bead of light before her pulsed again, not chaotically but rhythmically, like a heart finding its cadence. Its glow washed over the rocks, painting every face in pearlescent hues. Nur could see the terror in their eyes, but also something else, wonder, aching and raw. Mr. Hale's hand found her sleeve. "Step back," he whispered hoarsely, but his eyes never left the hovering thing. His voice was meant to steady her, yet he trembled like the lighthouse glass in a storm. Nur didn't step back. The voice came again, not aloud but directly inside her thoughts. This time it wasn't her father's name, it was hers. Nur, gentle, precise. As if it had been practicing her syllables for years, her knees weakened. She thought of the logbook still clutched to her chest, the last scrawl of her father's writing watch for the needle. Had he known? Had he heard the same call? Was this why he vanished? Round them, the other beads of light began to spread apart, hovering over the cliffs like lanterns carried by invisible hands. They emitted a soft hum that wove itself into harmony with the main light before Nur, a choir of alien resonance vibrating in every rib. The crowd began murmuring, some in awe, some in fear. One young man stumbled forward, holding up his phone in trembling hands, desperate to capture proof. The instant the lens focused, the device sparked, went dark, and slipped from his fingers into the grass. The light tilted toward Nur again. That seam down its side widened, not violently, but with the precision of something designed to open only when the world was quiet. Enough to notice. Inside was not machinery, not fire, not stone. It was something Nur could not categorize as shifting texture of fluid and lattice. Like light itself had been braided into shape. The sight pulled at her mind, trying to teach her a language without words. Then another voice, sharper, not in her head, but carried by the sea wind, everyone back. Away from it, it was Sheriff Delgado, his uniform half-buttoned, flashlight cutting through the dark. His cruiser had skidded up to the cliffside path, siren silent but light still bleeding red and blue into the grass. A pistol gleamed at his hip, though he hadn't drawn it yet. His eyes darted from the glowing shape to the crowd. He looked less like a lawman and more like a man trying not to drown. Back to the square. He barked now. "All of you." Some obeyed. Others lingered, transfixed. Nur didn't move. The sheriff's flashlight beam struck the bead, scattering into refracted shards like broken rainbows. The light responded. Its hum deepened, the tone sliding lower until the ground itself seemed to resonate. The smaller lights joined in, vibrating in sympathy. It wasn't aggression. It was communication. Nur knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. "They're not dangerous," she whispered. Though her own voice trembled, the sheriff turned on her sharply. "And how would you know that?" "Because it knew my father's name," she almost said. "Because it knows mine. Because it feels like it has been waiting." But she said nothing. Instead, the bead shifted closer, slow, deliberate, like a teacher approaching a hesitant student. The hum grew warmer, almost melodic. Nur's pulse quickened. She could feel the attention of the entire crowd tilting toward her. Mr. Hale's grip on her sleeve loosened as if even he knew resisting was pointless. The light hovered a meter away now. Nur raised her trembling hand. The sheriff shouted, "Don't touch it." The moment her fingers brushed the glow, the world shattered, not into pieces, into visions. Her mind filled with skies she had never seen, oceans the color of molten emerald, cities suspended in air like lanterns over a river, stars clustered in shapes no human chart had ever drawn. She felt weightless, carried through those images by something that wasn't showing her but sharing with her. And threaded through it all was her father's voice, not speaking words, but laughing. The low, warm laugh she had thought she'd forgotten. She gasped and staggered back, breaking contact. The visions vanished, leaving the real world brittle and small around her. The sheriff rushed forward, grabbing her arm. "Enough! We're leaving, now," before he could drag her away. The light emitted a single piercing chime. The smaller lights froze in place. The comet overhead flared, its tail brightening into a column that seemed to stretch not just across the sky but through it. As if pulling back a curtain, Nur's logbook fluttered in her hands, pages riffling as though caught in a storm. One page tore loose and flew upward, not downward, but toward the bead of light, sucked into it like a moth to flame. The seam snapped shut around it. The hum rose in pitch until everyone covered their ears. Then silence again. The light began to drift, not away but inland, toward the dark heart of Kestrel Bay. The smaller lights followed in formation. Noor, breathless, stumbled after it. She didn't know why, only that she had no choice. Behind her, Sheriff Delgado cursed, barking orders at the townsfolk. Mr. Hale called her name, voice breaking with fear, but Noor's gaze stayed fixed on the retreating glow, because somewhere inside that impossible light was her father's voice, and she would follow it into the dark if it meant answers. And as the comet's tail stretched wider across the heavens, painting the entire town in dream-like luminescence, a new fear pressed against her heart. This wasn't just a visitor. It was an invitation, and Noor had just accepted it. The cliff emptied slowly, like a dream people didn't want to wake from. Some townsfolk fled, clutching children or each other's arms, whispering prayers into the night. Others lingered in trembling awe, their eyes still locked on the comet's impossible glow arcing across the sky. But Noor didn't hesitate. She moved. The lights were leaving the cliffs, drifting inland in a formation too deliberate to be random. The lead sphere, the one that had spoken her father's name, floated just above the treetops, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat guiding its kin. It wasn't rushing. It wanted to be followed. Noor's boots crunched against gravel as she descended the path. Sheriff Delgado shouted after her, his voice raw with panic and authority. "Noor, stop! Don't you dare go down there!" She didn't stop. The logbook pressed against her ribs as she moved, as if demanding to be carried where it belonged. Its pages had always felt weighty with half-answers, but now one was missing, swallowed by the light itself. Hale caught up to her on the path, panting hard, his lantern swaying wildly. "Girl, you can't chase it. You don't know where it's going." Noor's breath came steady, unlike her pounding heart. "Yes, I do," she said. And though she hadn't planned the words, she knew them to be true. The light wasn't random. It was headed toward the lighthouse. Down below, the ancient tower loomed, its weather-beaten walls catching fragments of comet glow. The beam that usually cut across the bay each night was dead, swallowed by the strange radiance that drenched the cliffs. The structure looked less like a beacon now and more like a sentinel waiting to be addressed. When Noor and Hale reached the base, the sheriff's cruiser screeched to a stop behind them. Delgado jumped out, his pistol drawn now, his flashlight jerking through the air. "I said stop." His voice cracked with desperation. "You don't understand what this is." "Nobody does. We stay back until the feds get here. Do you hear me?" The lights didn't pause for his authority. They circled the tower, weaving in precise arcs, their hums blending into a chord that vibrated the old stones. The hairs on Noor's arms prickled. The formation was too exact, too purposeful. It was a pattern. Her father's logbook flashed in her mind, pages of circles, spirals, incomplete diagrams that had never made sense to her as a child. Spirals he'd traced absent-mindedly at the dinner table. Spirals he'd whispered about when he thought she wasn't listening. "Watch for the needle." The phrase shivered through her again. A needle, stitching patterns into the night sky. Noor stepped forward, toward the ring of lights. Delgado swore under his breath and aimed his gun at the ground near her boots. "One more step and I'll—" Before he could finish, the lead sphere emitted a pulsive sound so sharp it shattered the flashlight in his hand. Delgado staggered back, covering his ears, the pistol dangling uselessly at his side. His voice broke into silence as the hum climbed higher, washing over the cliffs and waves. Noor didn't hear fear in that hum. She heard calling. The light nearest her tilted, just as it had before, and the seam opened again. This time, instead of visions crashing into her mind, something physical emerged, a shard. Small, glimmering, no larger than her palm, but alive with a faint current of energy. It hovered for a heartbeat before drifting into her open hands. It was warm. It pulsed gently, sensing with her heartbeat until the rhythm of her body and the shard were one. Noor sucked in a breath. The shard unfurled like origami, revealing lines and inscriptions that glowed faintly blue. The script was not human, but somehow she understood it. Not as words, but as feelings, longing, distance, return. Return. Her father's laugh brushed her memory again. Not just memory echo. He had touched this before. He had been here. Nor, Hale whispered, his eyes wide, reflecting the glow in her hands. What in God's name is that? Her lips trembled as she answered. It's not God's. The lights around the tower shifted, their formation tightening, spiraling upward like a helix. The comet overhead blazed, the curtain of its tail shimmering brighter, as if responding to the shard in her grip. Suddenly, Noor realized the shard wasn't just an object. It was a key. In the lock was the lighthouse. The old tower groaned as if hearing her thought, stone trembling under pressure. From its lantern room burst a long dormant light, but not the pale beam of man-made glass. This was pure, piercing, an unearthly and answering signal. The crowd on the cliffs gasped. Delgado cursed. Hale fell at his knees, and Noor, with the shard burning bright in her palms, knew what was coming next. The lighthouse wasn't built to guide ships. It had always been a signal tower. And tonight, it was answering back. The shard pulsed like a second heart, every throb pressing harder, demanding. Noor's palms burned with its urgency. The spirals in the air spun faster, one collapsing inward to the earth, the other opening wide toward the endless dark. Her father's grip was tight, desperate. Noor, this is what I waited for, what I endured. To bring you here. To give you the choice I never had. The vessel's chamber hummed, alive with expectation. The orbs hovered close, their radiance flickering like stars impatient for her answer. Noor's breath hitched. Her whole life had been spent on the cliffs of Kestrel Bay, staring at the horizon and wondering if the world was larger than the town allowed. And now proof stood before her. Her father, alive, a doorway through the stars, an invitation to something greater. But she thought of the town, of Mr. Hale's lantern swaying in the dark, of Sheriff Delgado's panicked shouts, of the children on porches, wrapped in blankets, eyes wide at the comet's glow. They were waiting too, terrified, clinging to the only world they had. If she went, would she be leaving them to face the unknown alone? Her father's voice cut through her hesitation, low and urgent. They chose you, Noor, not me, you, because you carry both pieces, the earth and the sky. If you come, you'll learn what no human has ever known. You'll see what lies beyond time itself. Her eyes locked onto his. And if I stay? His face faltered. He couldn't answer. The shard flared, searing. The spirals above trembled, collapsing toward decision. The orbs sang, their tone deepening into a rising crescendo that filled her skull with vibrating light. The veil overhead rippled, unstable, beginning to seal. Her choice had to be now. Her father whispered, pleading, come with me. Noor shut her eyes. The lighthouse beam burned in her memory, reaching skyward, built not for ships, but for signals. She saw herself as a child, tracing spirals in the logbook, not knowing why it felt right. She saw the townsfolk, fragile, fearful, but alive, waiting for dawn, for reassurance that their world had not shattered. And she realized the truth. This was never about abandoning one world for another. It was about carrying the bridge between them. She lifted the shard high. I choose both. The chamber gasped not with sound, but with light. The spirals exploded outward, colliding, intertwining, fusing into a single radiant helix that spun faster and faster until it pierced the veil above. The vessel trembled. The orbs swirled chaotically, their tones breaking into fragmented chords. Her father staggered back, eyes wide. Noor, what have you done? The shard melted into her skin, fusing, becoming part of her. She felt it thread through her veins, embedding itself in every heartbeat. The hum of the vessel was no longer outside her, it was inside. She was the bridge now. The veil ripped open, wider than before. Not just a doorway, but a corridor stretching into directions, outward, to the endless stars, and downward, to the cliffs of Kestrel Bay. The orbs stilled. Then, one by one, they bowed. Not to her father. To her. Her father's face was torn between awe and fear. You've bound them to you, he whispered. You've changed the cycle. They won't leave now, not without you. The vision flooded her again, skies that had no names, Oceans of light, civilizations written in stars. But alongside it came a second vision: the cliffs, the lighthouse, the frightened townsfolk staring upward. Both futures interwoven, both hers. She stumbled under the weight of it, but the her shard kept her steady. The chamber pulsed with her heartbeat, and then something else moved from deep within the vessel. Beyond the chamber's curve, a shape stirred, larger than the orbs, older, heavier. Its presence pressed against her skull like gravity itself. Her father turned pale. "Nor, we woke them." The humming stopped. The chamber fell still. The orbs retreated like sparks fleeing a flame dot in from the darkness. The true occupants of the Comet ship began to emerge. Silence, not the silence of night or of a town holding its breath. This silence was vast, absolute, a silence that swallowed sound before it could be born. Nor floated in it, weightless, her body both present and absent. The shard still pulsed in her hands, but its warmth had spread through her veins, weaving into her heartbeat until she couldn't tell where she ended and it began. Her first thought was that she was dreaming. But dreams never felt this real. Dreams didn't carry the cold taste of metal, or the faint hum of electricity, or the scent of air so clean it almost burned. When her eyes adjusted, she realized she was no longer on the cliffs. She was inside the vessel. The chamber was enormous, but not built like any structure she'd known. Its walls flowed like the inside of a seashell, curved and iridescent, pulsing faintly with veins of light. Shapes drifted across the air, patterns, glyphs, constellations folding and unfolding as if the room itself were thinking aloud. And at its center stood a figure. Nur's heart slammed into her ribs. "Dad?" The man turned. His hair was streaked with silver, his beard ragged, his clothes torn and strange. But his eyes were unmistakable, deep, warm, and lit with a fire that had never left her memory. "Nor," he whispered, voice trembling like the sea against rocks. "You found it?" Her legs nearly gave way. She stumbled forward, caught between laughter and tears. You're alive." He caught her, his embrace solid, his chest heaving with disbelief as though he hadn't dared hope for this moment. "I prayed every night," he said, voice breaking. "I prayed you'd see the comet, that you'd understand the signs, that you'd follow." She pulled back, her eyes burning. "You left me. You disappeared. And all this time." She gestured around the chamber, words failing. "What is this? What are they?" Before he could answer, the walls shifted. Light poured inward, forming a circle around them. The patterns crystallized into symbols that hovered in the air, shimmering. The orbs, the smaller lights, slid into the chamber through unseen doors, surrounding them with their soft hum. "They're not invaders," her father said. "They're returners. This world was never theirs, but it was never fully ours either. They pass through when the cycle comes, leaving echoes, artifacts, signals, shards. The lighthouse was their beacon, built long before men settled Kestrel Bay. I only learned the truth when I touched one of their keys." He looked at her hands, at the shard glowing in her grip. "The same way you did." Nur's breath came shallow. "Why didn't you come back for me?" His expression shattered with guilt. "I tried. God, Nur, I tried. But once you cross, time isn't the same here. Ours for me were yours for you. Every time I tried to return, the cycle had already shifted. I thought I lost you forever." Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to weep, to collapse into his arms and never let go. But the vessel itself was stirring. The lights were no longer passive, they were watching. Waiting. Her father straightened, his voice urgent now. "The cycle is closing again. This wasn't just a visit, nor. It was an invitation. They chose you. Chose me for what?" She whispered. "To decide." The chamber darkened, save for the symbols burning overhead. They rearranged themselves into two spirals, one curling inward, toward the earth, the other unfurling outward, into the unknown. Her father's voice dropped. "They will leave. They always do. But they're offering something new this time. To take someone with them. To learn to return. You are their bridge now." Nur's head spun. Leave? With them? With her father? The thought was intoxicating and terrifying. Could she abandon Kestrel Bay, the life she knew, The people still clinging to the cliffs? What if I say no? She asked. The symbols flickered. The inward spiral dimmed. Her father's gaze lowered. Then they closed the veil. Another 50 years will pass before it opens again. I stay, you stay. And the chance to know what waits beyond the stars is lost. The shard in her hand pulsed harder, sensing with the spirals, pulling at her decision. Her father took her hands in his. Nor, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. You don't have to be afraid. Whatever choice you make it with courage. But if you come with me, you'll never see the world the same way again. The orbs leaned closer, their hums merging into one note of question. The spirals glowed brighter. The veil above the chamber trembled, threatening to close. Her father's hand tightened. Choose, Nur. Now. The shard burned white-hot in her grip. The chamber shook, and she realized her next word would decide everything. The lighthouse had always been stubborn, salt-worn, storm-battered, a relic older than the town itself. But as the alien shard pulsed in Nora's hands, the ancient tower came alive, stone trembling like it had been waiting centuries for this moment. A beam erupted from the lantern room, not white but prismatic, a living spectrum that cut across the night sky. It wasn't light, it was a language. Each flare flickered in patterns, shifting in deliberate sequences, painting the heavens with a script no human eye should have been able to decipher. And yet Nora's bones recognized it. The shard in her hands glowed in sync, its inscriptions rearranging themselves to match the tower's pulse round them. The smaller orbs rose higher, circling in formation like guardians protecting the ritual. Their hum intensified, weaving with the light until the cliffs themselves seemed to resonate. The very air quivered. The townsfolk on the ridge were no longer whispering. They were shouting, panicking, some fleeing back toward Kestrel Bay. But others, those who stayed, stood transfixed, weeping or praying or simply staring upward with the helpless awe of moths circling flame. Sheriff Delgado staggered to his feet, his face drenched in sweat. His pistol hung at his side, useless. He shouted at Nor, but the words were drowned by the harmony that roared from the tower and the sky. Only his fear was visible, etched sharp in the twitch of his jaw. Mr. Hale whispered hoarsely beside her, "It's answering something, Nor." But to what? She didn't respond. Her entire focus was locked on the shard. Every beat of its glow pulled her deeper into memory. Her father at his desk, eyes bloodshot but alive with wonder. Sketching spirals he claimed were star maps written for ears, not eyes. His sudden absences. Night she woke to an empty house and the smell of sea brine clinging to the air. His final entry in the logbook. Watch for the needle. He hadn't been lost. He had been summoned. The light's language crescendoed. Above, the comet responded, splitting apart with impossible grace. From its tail uncoiled a vast shape, hidden until now, revealed only by the call of the lighthouse. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't ice. It was a vessel. So large Nora's eyes could barely contain it. Not a craft built by hands, but something grown, organic, like coral sculpted in the vacuum of space. Its surface shimmered with constellations that weren't constellations at all, but windows or eyes. Or perhaps both. The very stars seemed to bow around it, bending faintly as it moved. Gasps erupted from the cliffs. Someone screamed. Delgado dropped his pistol entirely. Nor, though, felt only the rush of recognition. The shard burned hotter, and with its heat came visions fleeting, scattered, too fast to grasp. Her father's silhouette stepping through beams of light. His voice, broken into laughter. His hand reaching out, not for her, but with something else. Her knees buckled. Hale caught her before she fell, though even he was shaking. "What's happening to you?" Nora's voice cracked. "They're not here for us. They're here for me." The shard flared violently, and suddenly the lighthouse itself groaned like an opening gate. The prismatic beam narrowed, focusing upward into a tight column aimed squarely at the approaching vessel. For the first time, Nora heard the orbs around her speak aloud, not words, but tones, layered and resonant, harmonizing with the lighthouse. A choir of alien voices filling the night. The vessel responded in kind. The air tore open, not with violence, but with precision. A seam of light carved across the sky, revealing darkness behind the stars deeper. Stranger darkness, like the curtain of the universe peeling back. Noor's breath faltered. She realized what she was looking at, not a ship arriving, a door opening. Her father's voice whispered through the visions again, clear this time, as if standing just behind her ear. "Noor, follow." The shard in her hands pulsed like a heartbeat, and she knew it was asking her to step through. The crowd behind her cried out in terror. Delgado screamed something about closing the portal. Hale gripped her arm like he was holding her life from slipping away. But Noor couldn't move her eyes from the impossible doorway above, its edges shimmering with the hum of both the lighthouse and the comet-ship. She whispered, "To no one and to everything at once, Father, I'm coming." And as the vessel's vast shadow descended, the shard flared brighter, wrapping her in light before everything shattered into silence. The chamber's silence was worse than the hum. Noor's chest felt hollow, her heartbeat echoing in the sudden void. The orbs that had once surrounded her now hovered at a distance, dim like frightened children from the shadows. A shape unfolded. At first it looked like smoke, twisting and stretching into forms that never held still. But then the smoke gathered, solidifying into a presence vast, tall, and impossibly thin. Its surface wasn't flesh nor metal, but something in between. Every shift revealed stars glimmering through it, as if its body was a window into the night sky itself. The air thickened. Noor's knees buckled. Her father staggered, clutching his chest. The being radiated gravity, not physical, but something deeper, as though it bent the weight of thought itself. When it spoke, it was not with sound. It was with memory, child of two worlds. Noor's mind filled with visions. The lighthouse beam cutting through fog. The spiral of stars overhead. The shard now fused with her blood. She saw her father's abduction, years ago, when he first stood trembling in this same chamber. She saw him offered the choice, and his refusal. Her father whispered hoarsely, "It's them, the true architects." The being's form rippled, stretching taller. "We sent the shard so you would awaken. We called, and you answered." Now the path diverges, the chamber split with light. Two visions unfolded around her like mirrored dreams. In one, Noor stood among the stars, learning the architect's knowledge, leaving Earth behind. Cities of light, endless skies, a universe no human had yet touched. She was infinite, but Earth below dimmed, a fragile place forgotten, untended. In the other, Noor returned to Kestrel Bay, carrying the shard's resonance. She became the bridge her people had always feared but always needed. The world changed slowly, painfully, but humanity grew, eyes open to the sky, ready for more. The stars waited, patient, until Earth was ready to walk among them. The choice weighed heavier than gravity. Her father's eyes pleaded with her. "Don't make my mistake. Choose freedom. Choose the stars." But Noor saw more clearly now. His longing wasn't freedom. It was escape, a wound that never healed. She lifted her hand. The shard blazed from within her skin, radiating through the chamber. Her voice, steady, cut through the silence. "I choose not to abandon. I choose not to escape. One choose to carry both." The architects did not move. For a long breath, the chamber was frozen. Then, impossibly, the being bowed. Its star-riddled frame bent low, and its voice pressed into her mind one last time. "Then you are the bridge. Not visitor. Not captive. Anchor." The vision collapsed. The chamber shattered into spirals of light, each strand coiling back into the comet's skin. Noor felt the ground vanish, her body falling, her father's shout fading into the storm. Then silence. She opened her eyes. She was on the cliffs again. The lighthouse beam swept across the horizon. The comet was gone. Only the stars remained still, eternal, familiar. The shard's warmth pulsed in her chest. Quiet but alive. Behind her, the town stirred. People were stepping out of their houses, blinking up at the calm night sky. Children pointed. The sheriff lowered his rifle. Mr. Hale's lantern dimmed. The comet was a memory now. But Noor knew the truth. It had not left. It was within her, a presence humming, a doorway waiting. She turned toward the sea breeze, closed her eyes, and whispered to the horizon, "Not goodbye. Just until we're ready." And the stars above flickered just once as if answering her back.